Details now. Now, some parts of the Federal Capital Territory in the FCT are beginning to experience paucity of the naira as Nigerians approach Christmas. No fewer than 7 commercial banks in the Aya area of Abuja failed to dispense cash on Thursday. Some correspondents in Abuja who visited these ATMs on Thursday evening report that they could not withdraw, and it has been the case for about a week now. Also, point-of-sales operators lined up in their numbers in front of those banks to make brisk business. One of the POS operators, who identified himself simply Samuel, lamented that the ATMs have not been dispensing cash as expected. He noted that cash was only available at certain hours of the day. This is coming amid the Central Bank of Nigeria's directive that both the old and the redesigned naira notes remain a legal tender in Nigeria. The Supreme Court also in its judgment granted the priors of the federal government to lift the December 31 extension deadline for the usage of 200 naira, 500 naira and 1000 naira notes. While responding to the judgment, the CBN had this to say, and I quote, "To avoid doubt, the Supreme Court ordered that the old versions of 200, 500 and 1000 naira banknotes alongside the redesigned versions shall continue to be a legal tender." Meanwhile, renowned Islamic scholar Sheikh Ahmed Gumi expressed his belief that the Sunday bombing in Tudumbidi, Igabi local government area of Kaduna State, carried out by the Nigerian army using a drone and resulting in over 120 deaths, was intentional. He also said that the military fired the bomb to get back at the bandits who they had been fighting. You'll recall that the incident occurred during the celebration of Maulud, claiming innocent lives, including women and children, with over 60 others left injured. During his weekly lecture at the Sultan Bello Mosque in Kaduna, Sheikh Gumi criticized the military for targeting civilians, including women and children, questioning the decision to do so during warfare. He highlighted the discrepancy in the military's claim that the first bomb was a mistake and questioned the intentional nature of the second bomb, which targeted those evacuating the bodies. Sheikh Gumi emphasized that innocent villagers were often victims of security bombardments in the forest and had been warning against such actions. He stated, and I read, "I kept telling you not to invite people who see war as a solution, but people refuse to listen. Here it is now. War is never a joke because it affects everybody." End quote. He further recounted his calls for peaceful negotiation with groups such as bandits or Boko Haram, advocating for dialogue instead of resorting to violence. Gumi also disclosed a secret reason why the attack was carried out. He said, "It's you that will be killed. The bomb was meant to target the families of some people so as to kill their children and wives." He has been to a village where women and children were massacred in a remote forest. Many people have been bombed. Nobody said anything until it came nearer to the city. I have been saying it is important for peace to be the only form of dialogue. Now, a report by Premium Times indicates that the federal government spent about 3 billion naira to sponsor delegates to attend the United Nations Annual Climate Summit COP28, which started in Dubai last Thursday and will continue until at least the 12th of December. Nigeria had 1,411 delegates, ranking third among countries with the most delegates at the meeting. Only the host country, UAE, had about 4,409, and Brazil, 3,081, have more participants than Africa's most populous country. Other delegations surpassing 1,000 participants include China, which registered 1,411 people just like Nigeria, followed by Indonesia with 1,229, with Japan 1,067 and Turkey with 1,045. Parties to this convention from Nigeria include government officials, representatives from the private sector, civil society, the voluntary sector, state governments, media, multilateral institutions, representatives of marginalized communities, and many others. Nigerians, many of whom are struggling to make ends meet, have been outraged by the size of the government's large delegations at a time when the country's inflation rate is 27.33% and the government is planning to borrow more than $9 billion to fund its 27.5 trillion naira 2024 budget. As the outrage grew, the Minister of Information, Muhammad Idris, released a statement on Monday saying the federal government-sponsored delegation is made up of a total of 422 persons, not 1,411 as widely speculated. Now, according to data released by the organizers, the list of the Nigerian delegation includes the president and 2 of his children, 26 ministers, the chief of staff, 14 director generals, several directors, deputy directors, assistant directors, and several officials with different titles. Gilbert Chaguri is also part of the delegation listed as confidant of the president. Aside from the cost of a flight ticket, the federal government gives escort to each traveler depending on their level. Ministers are paid $900 as per a day as escort, which amounts to $11,700 per minister for the 13-day period the conference would last. At the official market, $1 is currently exchanged for 816 naira. This means a minister will get 9.5 million naira as an escort during the conference. About 26 ministers are attending the conference, according to official data from the United Nations Convention on Climate Change. This means the government will spend at least 248 million naira on minister allowances. The federal government has since defended the large delegation, dismissing the protest by opposition parties and citizens. And still on the world news at 12, the presidential candidate of the People's Democratic Party, Peter Obi, has actually asked the presidency to ensure that it gives, or rather earmarks, the 15 billion naira to renovate the residence of the vice president to fuel police vehicles. He said via his X account that there is a highlighted excessive expenses projected for renovating the official residences of Vice President Kashim Shettima, noting that it can fuel police vehicles nationwide. Obi also queried why presidential trips and office renovations should be worth over 65 billion naira. Expressing dismay at the significant funds set aside for transportation and office refurbishments within the presidency, Obi questioned the prioritization of these allegations over critical areas like internal security. Drawing attention to the plight of over 5,000 under-equipped police stations lacking operational vehicles and adequate fuel allowances, Obi proposed an alternative allocation strategy. He suggested redirecting funds from presidential expenses to support local manufacturers in procuring operational vehicles, also adequate fuel allowances to ensure that these vehicles are well maintained to provide security for the people. He said his proposal aims to redirect budgetary focus towards urgent security, health, education, and poverty alleviation needs. He also urged a comprehensive review of the budget, advocating for a realignment which prioritizes critical national requirements over what he perceives as excessive expenditure in non-productive sectors. Now, to talk about this and more issues on the World News at 12, I actually have via the telephone a legal practitioner, an economic strategist, a political and social affairs commentator, and that is Barrister Fred Nzako. Barrister Fred Nzako, good afternoon and welcome to VOP's World News at 12.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and good afternoon to our dear listeners.
Thank you, Barrister, for your patience all through. Let me start with the paucity in the dispensation of Naira. It's quite absurd that this is the festive period when people need cash to go about their businesses, their travels. Some want to go home, spend cash on their parents, buy goods, at least even if we do know how strict the economy is. What do you think is causing the paucity of cash in circulation, and why should Nigerians begin to go through this ordeal?
Well, Nigerians must know that the cashless or cash-like policy of the central bank, federal government, has not been suspended. The policy did not go away with the removal of the former CBN governor, Emefiele, who popularized that policy and made Nigerians to suffer because it was implemented very haphazardly. The new central bank governor is bent on implementing it in a very coordinated manner and with a coordinated approach towards ensuring that Nigerians maintain minimal cash holding in their daily living and in their daily transactions. The whole idea is that all channels of business transactions are still open through the banks, through the mobile transfers, and through all other channels as advertised by the various commercial banks. But many Nigerians thought that with the removal of Emefiele, that the cashless or cashless policy has gone. But that is not the truth. It is a policy of central bank, a policy of government, and of course it follows international best practice. So one is not at a loss why there is limited cash available. But the balancing factor there is that the minimum level of cash holding should be enough to make people not to suffer and to have a fairly good life, especially at this Yuletide season. So I think it is not something to worry about on account of the fact that Nigerians must know Nigerians had already adjusted to the policy. I don't know why we had to drop the ball after we had already adjusted. But what is lacking is
before you continue,
the public communication from the central bank.
Okay.
The department in charge of public communication needs to speak to Nigerians so that Nigerians will really understand what exactly the policies are. If there is any tweak or any change in the policy, then Nigerians will understand and adjust thereto. But when there is no information out there to the public, then the grey market will take over, and people will even begin to panic, and that could lead to the run on banks, especially when there is this news that about 8 banks in Nigeria could not meet the central bank cash reserve requirements. But we need to be told by the central bank what exactly is going on. But I can tell you,
between February and March of 2023, there was a serious cash crunch in the country. And of course, after that period, we saw how the whole Naira redesign policy affected a lot of Nigerians. Small businesses closed up because there was no cash in circulation. People couldn't purchase food. Traders who really don't like to rely on banks, who have to do day-to-day transactions with cash, suffered the most during this period. Now, apparently, Nigerians have come to accept the reality. According to you, from what you explained, you said Nigerians relaxed because the policy was already on and it was already being adjusted to. But do you think this timing is wrong? This is the Yuletide season. Don't you think whatever it is that needs to be possibly reorganized or recommenced can start off next year, and then there is a proper communication to that effect? But right now, don't you think this is even more harsher, considering how a lot of companies are closing up and Nigerians really need to try to organize themselves prior to the coming year?
The cash crunch, the severe cash crunch under Emefiele's regime as CBN governor is different from the cashless policy of today. The cash crunch was a cashless policy that was very badly managed, to the extent that the then central bank almost didn't want a single naira to be floating around, which was very bad because no matter how cashless an economy can run, there is basic threshold of cash that must be in circulation for people to continue to live their lives. But important thing is that Nigerians must be communicated to. Nigerians must be talked to. Nigerians must understand what the policies of government are at every point in time, so that there will not be any misgiving or any misinformation that could lead to misunderstanding of the policies. The cashless policy is still ongoing. Now, more so when the old Naira notes and the new Naira notes are still considered legal tender side by side. So there is no basis and no reason why Nigerians will continue to cry. But there is also no basis why Nigerians must go back to the old days of carrying sackloads of naira notes. Of course, the economics and the financial implications of carrying loads of cash around is not something that we'll begin to think about, because it pays the economy not any better. The cost of minting, the printing the notes is unimaginable, especially when such notes are printed abroad. So there's no reason why we would drop the cashless policy that we had already adjusted to. What we are asking for is that CBN should manage it with a threshold of the fact that basic minimum cash should be floating in the economy, but not to allow the economy to be overflooded by cash, because it has implication in inflation management and then the value of cost management of the naira. So, for the 15th time, I want to repeat that communication with the public is important, and that is where I find fault with the CBN if they can't come out and communicate to Nigerians so that we know the direction, the policy direction of government. This is a new government that needs to be talking to the people from time to time, so that when there's any new policy, we will understand, know, and adjust towards making the country and the economy better for all.
Barrister Fred Nzako, the ongoing COP28 summit in Dubai has generated quite the reaction in this part of the world ever since the president went there along with the delegates, both official and unofficial delegates. Now, apparently, an estimation based on a report gathered by Premium Times, about 3 billion naira was spent to sponsor these delegates to attend the United Nations Annual Climate Summit COP28. Now, while the president was addressing the delegates there, a couple of observations were made that the president wasn't looking at the delegates at the audience, rather more concentrating at the panel, those who were at the panel. You had John Kerry, the US Secretary of State, at the panel. You also had the Chinese representative. You also had Al Jabil, who was a COP28 president, and a couple of them had several facial expressions while President Bola Ahmed Tinubu was talking concerning the COP28 and Nigeria's consistent machination to keep up with whatever is being concluded on at the summit. Well, John Kerry was one of the persons who seemed to be quite impatient while the president was talking. He kept hitting his hand on the chair, almost like trying to tell the president to hurry up with what he wanted to say. Also, when he came on board, he mentioned that most of the nations who were here actually are the ones exacerbating the situation with the climate. He talked about fossil fuel, talked about the heat, talked about the persons who are in charge, whom he called all thieves. A couple of persons made it seem like he was referencing Nigeria particularly. What's your take on that reaction so far?
The issues around Nigeria's attendance of COP28 in Dubai, the issues have not rested, and they can very hardly be rested because virtually every Nigerian they criticize the idea of going to that conference with such large delegation, despite the explanation by the minister that the federal government catered for 422 out of the 1,411 delegates. But the issue now is that whether the delegates were catered for by federal government, state government, or even local government, or even by the public sector, every aspect of it shows that Nigeria's scarce resources have been dissipated in the process. The country that benefited from such retinue of a delegation is United Arab Emirates. And that is why, because for every expenditure made in that country on account of that delegation is a plus to their income level. Okay. And that's why countries always like to host international tournaments, international conferences, international symposia, and everything international that will bring many people from all around the world into the country, because each delegate will spend money, hotel, accommodation, feeding, shopping, and the rest of them. All this money spent will be spent in the country, the host country, and it is the host country that benefits. And even within the country, any state that hosts such conferences, a lot of money will be spent in the state. And within that period, the purchasing power of the people of the state will increase. So this delegation only benefits United Arab Emirates and does not benefit Nigeria, because so many of the people that went for the conference, we are yet to see the reason why they went there and what they have brought back.
All right, Barrister Fred. Let me ask you one final question, because I'll soon be rounding off. My time is off already. You do know Justice Joseph Shabo Ike. He passed on Wednesday evening in his hometown of Makurdi, and he was the president of the Port Harcourt division until he suddenly slumped before his family members and was promptly pronounced dead.
Sorry, Esther, I can't hear you. I can't get you.
Can you hear me now, Barrister Fred?
Yeah, better. It's better now.
I said Justice Joseph Shabo Ike passed on Wednesday evening, in his hometown of Makurdi, and he was the president of the Port Harcourt division until he suddenly slumped before his family members and he was promptly pronounced dead. Now, his death is coming weeks after political opposition in Ogun State accused him of taking cash bribes to uphold the controversial re-election of Governor Dakma Abiodun, and he was one that led the panel that upheld a lower tribunal decision, which was hinged largely on a technical claim. And since he passed on, a lot of Nigerians have reacted based on this. They say karma is catching up with the justices who enabled corruption, who enabled unconstitutional placement of individuals in political offices, and who are enabling the hardships Nigerians are going through. Would you call it the right train of thoughts with the passing on of this justice? And has it been affirmed that he indeed collected cash as bribe money, to uphold the controversial re-election of Governor Dakma Abiodun? Please, in a minute, what's your take on that?
It is very uncharitable for anybody to mock the dead. It is not in our culture, not in our custom, and it is not natural. We are all human beings, and we are susceptible to death that can come at any time. The learned justice was not the first to slump and die. Anybody can slump and die, even on the pulpit. Some people slump and die even in the field of play. So anybody, we don't own our life, and the life can go at any time. So if anybody begins to bring in the issue of karma and the issue of payback, because the justice slumped and died, such a fellow is not being natural, not being fair, and not being honest with himself. I do not want to believe that it is karma that is working. We are all human beings. Nobody knows tomorrow. Anybody can slump and die. So I want to tell and warn those who feed on such innuendo to desist from that and know that God giveth life and he taketh life at any time. And one should not begin to mock the dead. Like Caesar will say, if one does not have any good word to talk about the dead, such a person should keep mute and be silent forever.
All right. Do you think that Nigerians have become too insensitive, or you would say that the post-election trauma of a lot of Nigerians not getting their desired candidates could be the reason why such insensitive comments may be made? Because anything that has to do with the judges,
the issues about the election are issues that face all Nigerians. But because Nigerians like to pass the buck, when the electorate goes to vote and collects money and compromises his vote, he doesn't remember that there's a payback time. When the electorate does that and votes in the wrong people, the electorate will now come back to say, oh, they have not treated us well. It is the duty of all Nigerians, from beginning, from the head to the toe, from the leaders to the masses, from the elite to the left, that we must consciously build a country that we should be proud of. We cannot begin to pass the buck when it happens. We should look ourselves in the mirror and ask ourselves, what have we done that has brought Nigeria to this sorry state in our electoral practice, and what should we do to take our country to where we should belong? It is the duty of everybody, and one should not pass the buck, because we are all complicit in not doing what is right to our country, and that is why the country is where we are today.
All right, Barrister Fred Nzako, thank you so much for taking your time to explain the issues on the World News at 12. I sincerely do appreciate your input.
Many thanks.
All right. Now, to wrap up the world news, here again are the top stories. Naira scarcity hits Abuja and some parts of Lagos as automated teller machines fail to dispense cash. Gumi speaks up, reveals secret reason military bombed many people in Kaduna. New report reveals Tinubu's government spent about 3 billion naira to sponsor delegates to COP28 summit in Dubai. And Peter Obi asked Tinubu's government to use 15 billion naira earmarked for Shitima's residents to fuel police vehicles. That's a wrap on the world news at 12 right here on Voice of the People 90.3 FM. My name is Esther Mwachuku. To subscribe to our YouTube channel at VOP 90.3 FM. Across all social media handles as well, it's VOP 93 FM. To have yourself an amazing afternoon.